Good evening, and welcome to Mystic Bedtime Stories. I'm your gentle companion for tonight's journey, and I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this quiet time with me. Here, in our peaceful corner of the world, we gather stories that whisper rather than shout, tales that embrace you like a warm blanket on a cool evening tonight. We're going to travel together to one of the most remote places on Earth, where ancient stone faces watch over endless waters, and where the wind carries secrets that have been waiting centuries to be told. But first, let me invite you to find your most comfortable position. Perhaps you're already nestled in your favorite chair, or maybe you're settling into bed with pillows arranged just so. Feel the weight of the day slowly melting away from your body, like snow dissolving in warm sunlight. Your breathing is naturally beginning to slow, becoming deeper, more peaceful. The gentle rhythm of your breath is like the distant sound of ocean waves, steady and soothing now. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so, and imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast, quiet ocean. The water stretches endlessly before you, painted in shades of deep blue and soft gray. Above you, the sky is gentle, neither day nor night, but that magical time between, when the world becomes soft around the edges. Far across this peaceful water, so far that it seems like a dream itself, there exists a small island. It sits alone in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, more isolated than almost any other inhabited place on our planet. Tonight, we won't think of it as Easter Island, with all the tourism and modern associations that name might bring. Tonight, we'll call it by its true name, Rapa Nui, and we'll visit it not as it is today, but as it was in the long, quiet centuries when it held its secrets close, when the only sounds were the wind through tall grass and the eternal conversation between stone and sea. Picture yourself now on a boat that moves without effort. It simply carries you forward with the gentle persistence of a cloud, drifting across the sky. As you travel, you feel the salt air on your skin, fresh and clean, carrying with it the faint scent of distant land and growing things. The journey takes no time at all, or perhaps it takes forever. Time moves differently here in this space, between waking and sleeping, between the known world and the realm of dreams. And gradually, slowly, the island begins to take shape before you. At first, it's just a shadow on the horizon, no bigger than your thumb held at arm's length. But as your dream boat carries you closer, you begin to see the rolling hills covered in golden grass that waves like water in the constant breeze. You see the dark, volcanic rock that forms the island's bones, worn smooth by countless years of wind and rain, and then, standing like sentinels along the shoreline, you begin to see them, the Moai, the great stone faces that have watched over this island for 1,000 years. They don't turn to look at you as you approach. They simply stand as they have always stood, facing inland toward the heart of their island home, their backs to the endless ocean. These stone guardians are larger than you might have imagined, some nearly 40 feet tall, their massive heads crowned with ancient dignity. Their faces are solemn but not unfriendly, carved with an expression that seems to hold infinite patience. The dance of stars across the night sky. Your boat touches the shore with the softest whisper. The grass beneath your feet is soft as a carpet, and the wind that has traveled thousands of miles across open ocean to reach this place carries with it a sense of timelessness. of stories waiting to be told. The Moai closest to you seems to nod, just slightly, as if welcoming you to this sacred place. And in that gentle acknowledgement, you understand that you are about to hear the story of a people who lived in harmony with their island home for centuries, who carved their ancestors' faces in stone, not as monuments to ego, but as guardians of memory, as bridges between the world of the living and the eternal realm of those who came before. Tonight, we will walk together through the long, peaceful history of Rapa Nui. We will meet the people who called this island home, who found in its isolation not loneliness, but a profound connection to the earth, the sea, and the endless sky above. We will discover how they lived, how they created these magnificent stone faces, and how their civilization evolved over the centuries. But most importantly, we will let their story carry us gently toward sleep, like being rocked in the arms of the ocean itself. For this is a tale told, not for excitement or adventure, but for the deep peace that comes from understanding our place in the long, quiet story of human beings who have always looked to the horizon and wondered what lies beyond. So settle deeper into comfort now, and let the soft wind of Rapa Nui carry away any remaining tension from your day. The Moai are watching over you, these ancient guardians of stone, and in their eternal patience, you can find your own perfect rest. Our journey together. As you stand on the shore of Rapa Nui, breathing in the clean ocean air, let yourself truly appreciate the remarkable nature of this place where you've arrived. This small triangle of land, no bigger than a comfortable day's walk from end to end, sits in the middle of the world's largest ocean, like a single star in an infinite sky. Imagine, for a moment, the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. If you were to take all the land on Earth and scatter it across the Pacific's surface, and here, in the very heart of this immensity, sits Rapa Nui, 2,300 miles from the nearest populated land. To put this in perspective, it's as if you lived in New York City and your closest neighbor lived in Denver, with nothing but empty space between you. Long ago, when the world was younger and the seafloor restless, volcanoes pushed upward through miles of water, building this small sanctuary, grain by grain, eruption by patient eruption. Poik and Rano Raraku, their names rolling off the tongue like gentle incantations. Walk with me now across the island's surface. Feel the soft grass beneath your feet, golden and resilient, bending and rising again with each step. This grass grows everywhere here, creating a carpet that stretches from the rocky coastline to the gentle slopes of the old volcanic hills. It whispers constantly in the wind, a sound like thousands of quiet conversations. But as you walk, you might notice something unusual, something that speaks to a story both beautiful and melancholy. There are almost no trees. Here and there, you might spot a lonely specimen, bent and weathered by the constant ocean winds. Quality, like walking across the surface of a dream. This wasn't always so. Close your eyes and imagine this same landscape, but centuries ago, when the first Polynesian voyagers arrived after an epic journey across the Pacific. Picture their amazement as they approached an island covered in tall palm trees, their fronds dancing in the ocean breeze. The island they found was a green paradise, with forests so dense that the calls of seabirds would echo from tree to tree, like nature's own cathedral. These first inhabitants, the ancestors of the Rapa Nui people, though the exact date remains one of the island's gentle mysteries. They came in great outrigger canoes, following the stars across thousands of miles of open ocean, carrying with them everything they would need to start a new life: taro plants, sweet potatoes, chickens, and most importantly, their knowledge, their stories, and their deep spiritual connection to the land and sea. Imagine the courage this took. These weren't accidental castaways or refugees fleeing disaster. These were skilled navigators who chose to sail beyond the horizon, beyond the reach of any land they had ever known, trusting in their ability to read the stars, the currents, and the flight patterns of birds to find a new home. When they landed on Rapa Nui, they committed themselves and their descendants to this small piece of land for all time. The island they found was abundant. The rich volcanic soil supported their crops easily. The surrounding waters teemed with fish. The forests provided wood for their homes, their boats, and their tools, and shelter for the seabirds whose eggs became an important part of their diet. They built a society that was both practical and deeply spiritual. Families grew and thrived. Children learned the old skills from their elders: how to fish in the island's coastal waters, how to tend the crops that their ancestors had brought from distant Polynesia, how to read the signs in the sky and sea that told them when storms were coming or when the fishing would be good. They developed their own unique culture, influenced by their Polynesian heritage, but shaped by the particular gifts and challenges of their island home. They spoke a language that evolved from the tongue of their ancestors, but incorporated new words for the birds, told stories, and developed spiritual practices that honored both the living world around them and the memory of those who had come before. As the population grew, they organized themselves into clans. These weren't warring tribes, families, each contributing to the overall harmony of island life. They shared resources during difficult times, celebrated together during festivals, and maintained the careful balance between human needs and the island's natural capacity to provide. The silence that characterizes modern Rapa Nui wasn't always the defining quality of this place. Once, the island would have been filled with the sounds of daily life: children playing, adults working and talking, the rustle of wind through dense forests, and the calls of countless seabirds nesting in the trees. It was a place alive with the quiet busyness of a people living in harmony with their environment. As the population grew, as the clans became more distinct, as the spiritual practices of the people evolved and deepened, they began a project that would ultimately define their civilization and create the monuments that still watch over the island today. They began to carve their ancestors in stone, but as a way of keeping their departed loved ones present in their daily lives. These stone faces, which we now call Moai, weren't meant to be mysterious or imposing. They were meant to be comforting, familiar, as natural a part of the landscape as the grass and the sky. They were carved to face inland, not to look out to sea, because their purpose was to watch over the living, to provide guidance and protection to their descendants. As you stand on this peaceful island now, surrounded by the gentle sound of wind through grass and the distant rhythm of waves against the shore, you can begin to understand the deep contentment that characterized those early, where the seasons marked the passage of years, and where the most important events were the births. Memory, full of the echo of voices that once filled this space with laughter, conversation, ceremony, and song. And as you prepare to learn more about the remarkable people who called this island home, themselves into the fabric of your dreams, the Moai stand patient in the darkness around you, and in their eternal vigil, you can find your as the gentle wind continues to whisper across the island, carrying with it the scent of salt and growing grass. Let yourself sink deeper into the peaceful rhythm of this ancient place. Tonight, we're going to explore something beautiful and profound, the spiritual heart of Rapa Nui, where the boundary between the living and the dead was as soft and permeable as morning mist. In the quiet comfort of your resting place, imagine yourself sitting cross-legged on the warm grass of Rapa Nui, surrounded by a small group of islanders from centuries past. The evening light is golden and gentle, casting long shadows across the landscape. An elder, her face lined with the wisdom of many years spent under the island sun, begins to speak in a voice as soothing as the evening breeze. To understand the Moai, for them, death was not an ending, but a transformation, like water becoming vapor or day becoming night. When someone they loved passed from this world, their physical body returned to the earth. Self remained present, available, ready to guide and protect their descendants. This wasn't a belief they held lightly or abstractly. It was as real to them as the ground beneath their feet or the stars above their heads. They could sense their guidance in the way the fishing nets, filled with silver fish, or the sweet potatoes grew fat and nourishing in the rich volcanic soil. But the Rapa Nui people wanted something more than just this invisible presence. They wanted their ancestors to have bodies again, to be able to stand among the living and watch over their families with eyes that could see, faces that could express the love that transcends death. And so, with a tenderness that took centuries to fully express, they began to carve these beloved spirits into the volcanic stone of their island. Picture the first Moai being conceived, not in a moment of grand ambition, but in a quiet moment of profound love. Perhaps it was a son, missing his father, who had been the wisest fisherman on the island, or a community wanting to honor a beloved leader whose guidance had seen them through difficult seasons. The impulse wasn't to create something impressive or intimidating, but something comforting. Something that would make the presence of the departed feel as real and reassuring as it had been in life. The volcanic rock they chose for this sacred work came primarily from the crater of Raraku, a place that became the island's great workshop, its spiritual heart. With the tools they had available, yet durable enough to withstand centuries of wind and rain. More importantly, it seemed to the carvers to hold something of the island's own living spirit, as if the rock itself wanted to become something more than stone. Imagine walking with me now to Raraku, this sacred quarry where so much love was transformed into lasting form. The crater rises gently from the surrounding grassland, its slopes dotted with the shapes of Moai in various stages of completion. Some stand finished and majestic, their faces serene and watchful, as if they are slowly emerging from the earth itself, born from the marriage of human devotion and the island's generous stone. As you approach these ancient figures, you begin to understand that each one is utterly unique. Though they share a family resemblance, like human siblings, no two are exactly alike. This one has a broader nose, that one a more prominent chin. This one seems to be smiling slightly, while another appears deep in thought. They weren't mass-produced according to some standardized pattern, but individually crafted, each one a portrait of a specific person. The carvers themselves were specialists, master artists, who dedicated their lives to this sacred work. They passed their skills from father to son, mother to daughter. But they weren't isolated craftspeople working alone. The entire community participated in the creation of each moai, some providing food for the carvers, others offering obsidian tools, still others contributing the ropes and wooden rollers that would eventually transport the finished figures to their final resting places. The work was slow, meditative, almost ceremonial, using tools made from harder volcanic rock and sharp obsidian blades. The carvers would spend months on a single figure, gradually revealing the face they could see waiting within the stone. They worked with a patience that modern people might find difficult to understand, but which made perfect sense within their understanding of time and devotion. After all, they were creating something meant to last forever. Listen to the rhythm of their work echoing faintly across the centuries, the soft tap-tap of stone against stone, the gentle scraping of obsidian across volcanic rock, the quiet conversations of the carvers as they shared techniques and stories. This wasn't the harsh sound of industrial construction, but something more like music, a percussion symphony played out over months and years, each strike of the tools adding another note to the island's growing song of remembrance. As each moai neared completion, the spiritual significance of the work deepened. The final stages of carving were the most sacred, the creation of the eye sockets, which would eventually hold coral and obsidian eyes that could truly see, and the careful shaping of the lips, which seemed always on the verge of speaking words of wisdom and comfort to the living. But perhaps the most profound aspect of moai creation was the moment when the community officially recognized that the stone had been successfully transformed from mere rock into the dwelling place of an ancestor's spirit. This wasn't marked by a grand ceremony or public declaration, but by a subtle shift in the way people related to the figure. Suddenly, it wasn't something they were making, but someone who was present, someone who deserved respect, consultation, and yes, love. The Rapa Nui people developed elaborate protocols for interacting with their stone ancestors. They would bring them food offerings, not because they believed the moai would physically consume them, but as a way of maintaining the social bonds that had existed in life. They would seek their counsel on important decisions, standing before their familiar faces and allowing the peace and wisdom of the ancestors to settle over them like a gentle blessing. Children grew up surrounded by these stone guardians, learning to see them not as curiosities or monuments, but as beloved family members who happened to be made of rock. A child might have a favorite moai, perhaps representing a great-grandmother they had never met in life, but whose stories they knew by heart. They would play in the shadow of these figures, their games watched over by eyes that seemed to sparkle with ancient amusement. The moai were also consulted in matters of community harmony. When disputes arose between families or clans, the conflicting parties might gather before a particularly wise ancestor, seeking guidance not through dramatic pronouncements, but through the quiet process of sitting in the presence of someone who had transcended earthly concerns and could see situations with perfect clarity and compassion. And at night, when the island settled into the deep quiet that still characterizes it today, the moai stood their eternal vigil, the Rapa Nui people could sleep peacefully, knowing that their ancestors were awake, watching, ready to offer protection against any threat, comfort against any sorrow, guidance through any confusion. This understanding of the Moai as living presences, rather than mere sculptures, explains something that often puzzles modern visitors: why they face inland rather than out to sea. They weren't sentries watching for invaders or beacons guiding boats to shore. They were family members, focused on the daily lives of their descendants, concerned with the crops and children, the festivals and fishing, the endless small details that make up the texture of human existence. As you rest here in the peaceful darkness, surrounded by the gentle sounds of wind and distant waves, let yourself feel something of what the Rapa Nui people experienced in the presence of their stone ancestors. There's something profoundly comforting about being watched over by those who have gone before, who have faced the challenges of life and emerged into a state of eternal peace and wisdom. The Moai stand patient in the night around you, between worlds, these expressions of love that conquered death and time. In their serene presence, in their eternal vigil of care and protection, you can find the deep rest that comes from knowing you are never truly alone, never without guidance, never beyond the reach of love. Let their ancient peace settle over you now, carrying you gently toward sleep, where the boundary between stone and spirit, between past and present, becomes as soft and permeable as the island mist, and where all stories converge in the peaceful realm of dreams. In the gentle twilight of your imagination, as the peaceful sounds of Rapa Nui continue to wash over you like a lullaby, let us turn our attention to one of the most beautiful mysteries of this enchanted island. How did the Moai come to stand where they do today, scattered across the landscape like ancient guardians, frozen in an eternal dance? Settle yourself more comfortably now, and imagine that you are floating gently above the island, looking down with the soft vision of a dream to their final resting places, a story that unfolds like a slow, graceful ballet performed across centuries. The process began, as all beautiful things do, with careful preparation and infinite patience, or even years, allowing the community to prepare for the monumental task of moving. Picture the master transporters of Rapa Nui, specialists whose knowledge was as revered as that of the carvers themselves. These weren't simply strong people who could lift heavy objects, but engineers and logisticians whose understanding of physics, teamwork, and the island's geography had been refined over generations. They approached each transport as both a technical challenge and a sacred ritual, knowing that they were not merely moving stone, but helping an ancestor find their proper place in the world. The first and most widely accepted theory about how the Moai traveled involves a method as elegant as it is practical. Imagine teams of islanders weaving strong ropes from the fibrous plants that grew abundantly on Rapa Nui. These weren't rough, hasty constructions, but carefully crafted tools. Each rope twisted and tested until it could bear enormous weight without breaking. The making of these ropes was itself a community activity, with entire families participating in the patient work of harvesting, preparing, and weaving the fibers. Once the ropes were ready, the Moai would be carefully laid on its back atop a framework of wooden rollers cut from the palm trees that once covered the island. These rollers, each one shaped and smoothed by skilled hands, would be arranged in a line pointing toward the statue's destination. The moai would then begin its journey, pulled by dozens of people working in perfect synchronization, while others would run ahead to move the rear rollers to the front, creating an endless pathway of wood across the island. Imagine the sound of this procession, the deep, rhythmic chanting of the pullers as they coordinated their efforts, the gentle creaking of the wooden rollers as they turned beneath their enormous burden, the soft whisper of ropes sliding through calloused hands. This wasn't the harsh noise of machinery, but something almost musical. A slow song of human cooperation and determination that would echo across the island for days or weeks as the moai made its patient way to its new home. But perhaps the most enchanting theory about moai transport is one that emerges from the oral traditions of the Rapa Nui people themselves. According to these ancient stories, the moai didn't need to be pulled or rolled at all. Instead, they walked to their destinations under their own power, guided by the spiritual energy, the mana that had been invested in them during their creation. This beautiful idea isn't as fantastical as it might first appear. Recent experiments by archaeologists have shown that a moai, when properly balanced and rocked back and forth by coordinated teams pulling ropes attached to its head, can indeed appear to walk across the landscape, maintaining its upright position while moving forward in a gentle, swaying motion. The sight is both mesmerizing and deeply moving, as if the statue has truly come to life. Picture this magical procession, a massive moai, standing upright as if taking a leisurely stroll across the island, surrounded by dozens of people working in perfect harmony to maintain its balance and forward momentum. The statue seems to dance as it moves, swaying gently from side to side, its face serene and patient as it travels toward its destiny. The people around it move like the components of a well-orchestrated ballet, each person knowing exactly when to pull, when to release, when to adjust their position to keep their ancestral guardian moving safely forward. This method of transport would have been deeply meaningful to the Rapa Nui people, reinforcing their belief that the moai were not inanimate objects but living presences. To see their stone ancestors literally walking across the landscape would have been a profound spiritual experience, a visible confirmation that death was indeed just another form of life, and that love could animate even the heaviest stone. The journey of each moai was a community celebration that might last for weeks. Families would come out to watch the procession pass, offering food and encouragement to the transport teams. Children would run alongside the moving statue, their laughter adding to the rhythm of the chants. Elders would offer prayers and blessings, ensuring that the ancestors' journey would be safe and successful. As the moai approached its destination, the careful work of placement would begin. The chosen site wasn't random, but had been selected with great care, often on a ceremonial platform called an ahu. These platforms, built from precisely fitted stones, were themselves works of art and engineering, designed to support the enormous weight of the moai while creating a dignified setting for the ancestors' eternal vigil. The process of raising a moai to its final upright position was perhaps the most delicate part of the entire operation. Using a combination of stone ramps, wooden levers, and coordinated human effort, the teams would slowly, carefully lift the statue from its traveling position to its final stance. This moment, when the Moai first stood upright in its permanent home, would have been deeply emotional for the community, marking the completion of a process that might have taken years from start to finish. Once the Moai was in place, the final touch would be added: the pukao, a cylindrical headdress carved from red volcanic stone from a different quarry entirely. These hats or topknots weren't merely decorative, but represented the red feathers that were symbols of power and spiritual authority in Polynesian culture. The placement of a pukao required another complex engineering feat, as these stone headdresses could weigh several tons themselves. The completed Moai, standing on its ahu with its pukao proudly in place, would then receive its eyes, carefully shaped pieces of white coral with obsidian pupils that gave the statue the ability to truly see. The moment when the eyes were inserted was considered the moment when the ancestor fully inhabited the stone, when the statue became not just a representation, but a living presence. Imagine the ceremony surrounding this moment. The community gathered in reverent silence. The elder who had known the ancestor in life, approaching with the precious coral eyes, the gentle placement of these final details, and then the collective intake of breath as the Moai's gaze fell upon its descendants for the first time. Its presence a constant source of comfort and guidance. It would witness the daily rhythms of island life, the fishermen departing at dawn, the farmers tending their crops, the children playing in the shadows of the ceremonial platforms. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the Moai creation and placement process was its fundamentally cooperative nature. No single person or family could complete such a monumental task alone. It required the entire community working together, sharing resources, knowledge, and labor in a spirit of mutual support and common purpose. As you rest here in the gentle darkness, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the island night, Nui people must have experienced when they looked upon their completed Moai weren't just impressive sculptures or engineering marvels, but expressions of love made manifest in stone, proof that human devotion could move mountains. The ancient techniques and mysteries of Moai transport continue to whisper their secrets to the night wind. And there was a time, long ago, when Rapa Nui breathed differently. The island inhaled through millions of leaves that rustled in the ocean breeze, and exhaled the sweet scent of flowering palms that reached toward the endless sky. If you could travel back in your dreams to that ancient time, you would step not onto the grassy hills we know today, but into a forest cathedral, forest floor with gentle light. These were not ordinary palm trees. The Rapa Nui palm grew taller than any building you might know, their trunks straight and strong as the masts of great ships. The island was home to perhaps 16 million of these magnificent trees, creating a verdant paradise in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean. The people of Rapa Nui lived in harmony. They understood the language of the trees, knew which fronds could be woven into baskets strong enough to carry the heaviest stones. Longest nights. The forest provided everything: shelter from storms, materials for their boats, food for their bodies, and wood for the great fires that helped them carve their beloved Moai. Children played in the dappled shadows beneath the palms, chasing the island's flightless birds through groves that seemed to stretch forever. Elders gathered under the spreading canopy to share stories that wound through the generations, like the roots of the great trees themselves. And at night, the entire forest would settle into a peaceful quiet, broken only by the gentle sighing of wind through countless leaves and the distant, eternal song of waves against distant shores. But forests, like all living things, exist in a delicate balance. And on this small island, surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean, that balance was as fragile as morning mist. The people needed the trees for their most sacred work. Each moai required not just stone and skill, but wood for fires to heat the tools, logs to roll the massive statues across the island, ropes to raise them upright. The bigger the statue, the more trees were needed. And as the various clans competed to create ever more impressive monuments to their ancestors, the forest began to feel the weight of their ambition. Generation by generation, the trees grew fewer. At first, the changes were subtle. A clearing, here, a hillside, there. The islanders adapted, as people always do. They learned to venture farther into the forest for the best trees, to make do with smaller logs, to weave their ropes from different materials. They were resourceful and clever, these people of Rapa Nui. They found ways to continue their sacred work. But the forest held another secret. The island were tiny passengers, rats. These Polynesian rats, no bigger than a child's hand, found paradise in the palm forests. They discovered that the seeds of the great palms were delicious, and they ate them with an appetite that seemed endless. Night after night, season after season, the rats climbed into the towering palms and devoured the seeds before they could fall to the ground and sprout into new trees. It was a quiet catastrophe, invisible to human eyes. But the forest floor remained mysteriously bare of new growth. The older members of the community began to notice changes that their grandparents would never have imagined. The morning bird songs grew quieter each year, as species that had lived in the forest for countless generations found their homes disappearing. The streams that had once run clear and cool, shaded by overhanging branches, began to run muddy after rains, became more difficult as well. Without large trees to build the sturdy canoes their ancestors had used, the people found themselves limited to smaller boats that could not venture far from shore. The deep water fish that had once provided abundant protein became harder and harder to catch. The ocean seemed to be pulling away from them, just as the forest was disappearing around them. By around the year 1400, something unprecedented happened. The last palm tree on Rapa Nui died. Imagine the silence on the day when the final ancient giant creaked and fell to the forest floor. The island that had been green for thousands of years suddenly stood naked under the Pacific sky. But this was not a story of sudden disaster. This was not a tale of apocalypse. Instead, it was something more poignant, the slow, almost imperceptible transformation of a world. They adapted, season by season, to a changing landscape. They found new ways to live, new sources of food, new materials for their tools and art. Where once great palms had stood, they cultivated gardens. They learned to build walls of stone to protect their crops from the constant ocean winds. They discovered how to create rich soil in small plots, how to catch and store the precious rainwater, how to harvest the sea in new ways when the land provided less. The children who had never known the great forest did not mourn what they had never seen. They found their own games to play on the grassy hills, their own stories to tell under the vast, unobstructed sky. They learned to read the moods of the ocean, to predict weather from the flight of seabirds. It changed. The great statues became smaller, more precious. Instead of rolling them on wooden logs, the people developed new techniques. Once relied on the leverage that large timbers provided. The loss of the forest was not the end of the story of Rapa Nui. It was a transformation, a lesson written in stone and soil about the delicate threads that connect all life on our small worlds. The people learned, perhaps more clearly than any civilization before or since, that on an island there is no away. The island taught its people about limits, about balance, about the preciousness of what can never be replaced. In losing their forest, they found new ways to see the world. In facing scarcity, they discovered resilience. Sun sets on this chapter of our story. Imagine the island as it became, not lush and green as it once was, but beautiful in a different way. Rolling hills covered in grass that turns golden in the evening light. Stone gardens carefully tended by hands that have learned to coax life from what seems lifeless. Shadows but proud against the open sky, witnesses to all the island has seen, guardians of all the lessons it has learned. The wind that once whispered through millions of palm fronds now sighs across open grassland, carrying different stories. But stories nonetheless. Stories of adaptation, of resilience, of the endless creativity of people who refuse to surrender to despair. Even in endings, there can be new beginnings. Rest now and let these gentle lessons carry you toward peaceful dreams, where wisdom grows like grass. In the gentle twilight of our story, as the ocean breeze carries whispers from centuries past, we find ourselves drawn deeper into the heart of Rapa Nui society. The island, once covered in lush palm forests, had begun its transformation into the stark landscape we know today. But within this changing world, the people themselves were also evolving, their social fabric stretching and reshaping under the weight of growing ambitions and dwindling resources. Picture, if you will, the island as it was in those distant days. The morning mist would rise from the crater lakes, and the first light of dawn would touch the shoulders of the emerging Moai. But this serene image held beneath it a complexity that would reshape the very soul of the island. For the people of Rapa Nui were not a single, unified group living in harmony. They were a tapestry of families, clans, and lineages, each with their own stories, their own chiefs, and their own dreams of greatness. The Rapa Nui society was organized around various clans, each believing their Maui represented the spirits of their ancestors who had received supernatural power from the paramount god Make. These weren't simply family groups sharing meals around a fire. They were sophisticated social structures, each with its own territory, its own sacred sites, and its own interpretation of how the world should be ordered. Imagine the island divided like a great wheel, with each clan controlling a slice that extended from the inland volcanic slopes down to the precious coastline. The Miru clan, descendants of the island's legendary first king, held sway over the northern shores. The Tupahotu controlled the fertile western lands. The Marama watched over the eastern coastline, while the Homona claimed the southern territories. Each had their own chiefs, their own genealogies, traced back through generations of proud ancestors, and their own sacred burial grounds, where the spirits of the dead continued to watch over the living. In the early days, when the forests were thick and the island could support its growing population, they intermarried, shared resources, and participated together in the great communal efforts that defined their civilization. The quarrying of Moai was a collaborative endeavor, with skilled craftsmen from different clans working side by side in the volcanic crater of Rano Raraku. The transportation of these massive statues required cooperation on a scale that could only be achieved when the entire community worked as one. But as the centuries passed, as the population grew and the resources became scarcer, the delicate balance began to shift. The clans that had once collaborated now found themselves in subtle competition. It wasn't warfare, not yet, but rather a gradual transformation of communal pride into clan rivalry. The construction of Moai, once a shared celebration of ancestral power, slowly became something else, entirely a contest of prestige and influence. Rivalry between clans drove the islanders to build hundreds of increasingly big Moai, with each clan trying to surpass the others in the size and grandeur of their statues. Imagine the island's chiefs gathering in the crater of Rano Raraku, walking among the emerging statues, comparing sizes, counting the number of completed figures. What had once been expressions of collective spiritual power now became symbols of individual clan superiority. The Miru clan, with their royal lineage, commissioned statues that seemed to grow larger with each generation. There, Moai stood tall and proud, facing inland to watch over their territories with an air of ancient authority. Not to be outdone, the Tupahotu began creating their own monuments, each one carefully positioned to overlook the most fertile lands. On the western slopes, the competition was subtle but unmistakable, conducted through stone and ceremony rather than spear and shield. Picture the island's master carvers, once revered as neutral artisans serving the entire community, now finding themselves courted by competing clans. Chiefs would visit the quarries bearing gifts of food, shells, and precious obsidian tools, hoping to secure the services of the most skilled craftsmen. The size of a clan's Moai became a measure of their wealth, their influence, and their ability to command the labor of others. As the years passed, this competition intensified. Clans began to jealously guard their resources, their fishing grounds, their freshwater sources. The great communal projects that had once united the island began to fragment into clan-specific endeavors. Each group wanted their own Ahu platform, their own row of Moai, their own demonstration of ancestral power. The island's landscape slowly filled with these competing monuments, each one a stone declaration of clan pride and territorial claim. The chiefs, once content to share authority in council, now found themselves locked in increasingly complex negotiations over resources and status. Who had the right to quarry stone from which section of the crater? Which clan could claim the best fishing grounds? Who had precedence in the sacred ceremonies that marked the changing seasons? These questions, once resolved through tradition and consensus, now became sources of ongoing tension. Yet, even as the competition grew, it remained civilized, conducted according to the ancient protocols that governed Rapa Nui society. The rivalry expressed itself through the magnificence of their monuments rather than the violence of their weapons. This was not warfare, but rather a form of competitive display. like peacocks showing their feathers or songbirds competing for the most beautiful melody. The consequences of this rivalry rippled through every aspect of island life. Young men and women found their marriage prospects increasingly limited to within their own clans. The easy sharing of resources and knowledge that had characterized the early centuries, competition for limited resources such as land, fresh water, and food became the usual causes for tension among the clans. The island's chiefs found themselves walking an increasingly narrow path, trying to maintain their clan's prestige while avoiding outright conflict with their neighbors. The delicate balance that had sustained Rapa Nui society for centuries was beginning to strain under the weight of these growing ambitions. As we drift deeper into our peaceful reverie, we can almost hear the echoes of those ancient competitions carried on the evening breeze. The sound of stone chisels working in the quarries, the rhythmic chanting of work crews moving massive statues across the landscape, the quiet conversations of chiefs as they planned their next monument to clan glory. It was a time of great creativity and ambitious dreams, but also of growing tensions that would eventually reshape the island's destiny. The Moai themselves seemed to sense this change. No longer content to be mere representatives of collective ancestral power, each statue now carried the specific mana of its commissioning clan. They stood in rows along the coastline, their backs to the sea, their faces turned toward the inland territories they were meant to protect and oversee. Silent guardians of clan honor, they watched over a society that was slowly, inexorably changing from within. And as the sun set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the island's growing collection of stone monuments, the chiefs and their people retired to their clan compounds, each group dreaming of the greater glories that tomorrow might bring. The age of competition had begun, and with it, the stage was set for even greater changes that would transform not just the island's landscape, but the very soul of its civilization. In this gentle twilight of remembrance, we can feel the weight of those ancient ambitions, the dreams and rivalries that would ultimately lead to both the greatest achievements and the most profound challenges in Rapa Nui's long history. The island sleeps now, its Moai standing eternal vigil, guardians of memories that stretch back across the centuries to a time when stone and spirit were one, and the fate of an entire civilization hung in the balance of clan pride. As we continue our gentle journey through the twilight of Rapa Nui history, we come upon one of the most profound and mysterious chapters in the island's story. The wind carries with it a different quality now, heavy with the weight of change and transformation. For we have reached the time when the mighty Moai, those eternal guardians who had watched over the island for centuries, began to fall. Picture the island as it was in the late 1700s, when the first light of dawn would reveal a landscape forever altered. Where once proud rows of Moai had stood sentinel along the coastline, their faces turned inward to protect their people. Now, many lay fallen, their massive forms stretched across the earth like sleeping giants. The sight would have been both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring. For even in their fallen state, these monuments retained their power to move the human spirit. The shift away from the Moai cult and the toppling of the giant statues occurred toward the end of the 18th century, marking the end of an era that had defined the island's identity for nearly a millennium. But this was not a sudden catastrophe that struck in a single night. Rather, it was a gradual process, as complex and nuanced as the society that created these monuments in the first place. The reasons for the Moai's fall were as varied as the statues themselves. Some statues may have simply fallen from neglect, others were knocked over in earthquakes, and some were intentionally toppled during fighting between competing family groups. The most common theory is that the statues were overthrown in tribal warfare to humiliate the enemy, with most statues falling forward with their faces to the earth. As the island's resources dwindled and the competition between clans intensified, the very symbols that had once united the people in common purpose became targets in their growing conflicts. Imagine the profound psychological impact of watching these ancestral guardians being deliberately toppled. For the Rapa Nui people, this was not merely the destruction of stone monuments, but the shattering of the spiritual foundations upon which their entire world had been built. The toppling of the Moai represented more than physical destruction. By then, the cult had lost most of its political and religious credibility, even though the Rapa Nui continued worshipping their ancestors. The old ways of organizing society, of determining leadership, of connecting with the divine, were being called into question. The Moai, once symbols of unified spiritual power, had become associated with the old rivalries and competitions that had brought the island to the brink of ecological and social collapse. But human societies, like the ocean itself, are never truly still. Even as the old beliefs crumbled, new ones began to emerge from the ruins. At some point in history, the cult of deified ancestors, represented by the Moai statues, was abandoned, due to a loss of prestige of the old political and religious order. In its place, something entirely different began to take shape. After the decline of Moai culture on Easter Island, a new cult emerged that revolved around fertility and the worship of migratory seabirds. This was the birth of the Tangata Manu, or Birdman cult, a religious transformation that would fundamentally alter the spiritual landscape of Rapa Nui. This unique religion emerged on Rapa Nui in about the 1600s and lasted into the 1800s. The Birdman cult represented a radical departure from the ancestor worship that had dominated the island for centuries. Where the Moai had been static, eternal guardians carved from volcanic stone, the new faith looked to the sky and the sea, to the seasonal migrations of the sooty tern and the promise of renewal that came with each spring. As the Moai had represented the idea of ancestor worship, the new Birdman cult was represented by the Tangatamana Birdman, a human body with the head of a bird. This transformation reflected a society in crisis, seeking new ways to organize itself and find meaning in an increasingly challenging world. The Birdman cult was not simply a replacement religion, but a complete reimagining of how power should be distributed and how the divine should be accessed. Instead of hereditary chiefs drawing their authority from ancient lineages, the new system created a competition where leadership could be earned through courage, skill, and spiritual favor. The center of this new faith was the ceremonial village of Orongo, perched on the rim of the Rano Kau crater. From this dramatic vantage point, participants could look out over the vast Pacific to the rocky islets of Motu Nui, Motu Iti, and Motu Kau Kau, where the sooty terns came to nest each spring. It was here that the island's most daring young men would gather to compete for the honor of becoming the Tangata Manu, the Birdman, for the coming year. The competition itself was a testament to the Rapa Nui people's enduring connection to the sea and their extraordinary courage. Warriors would climb down the treacherous cliffs of Orongo, swim through shark-infested waters to the offshore islets, and search for the first sooty tern egg of the season. The man who successfully returned with an unbroken egg would become the Birdman, gaining not just personal honor, but also political power for his sponsor, chief. This new religious system brought with it a different kind of social organization. The cult of the Birdman reflected a very visible expression of political competition and cooperation at the island-wide level, representing a shift from the clan-based rivalries that had characterized the Moai period to a more integrated form of leadership that transcended traditional kinship groups. The transition was not without its symbolic power. As the great stone faces of the Moai lay silent in the grass, new images began to appear across the island's landscape. Petroglyphs of the Birdman, with his distinctive combination of human body and bird head, were carved into the volcanic rock at Orongo and other sacred sites. These images, etched into the living rock, represented a new understanding of the relationship between the human and divine realms. The Birdman himself lived a life of sacred isolation during his year of power. He would be expected to engage in no activity other than eating and sleeping during this time. This was not the active leadership of the old chiefs, but rather a form of spiritual guardianship, where the Birdman served as a living connection between the earthly and divine realms. As we rest in the gentle embrace of this evening's story, we can almost feel the profound transformation that swept across the island during these tumultuous times. The fallen Moai, their faces pressed against the earth they had once protected, bore silent witness to the end of one era and the beginning of another. The wind that had once carried the sounds of stone chisels and work songs now brought the cries of seabirds and the prayers of a people, learning to find hope in the sky rather than in the stone. This was not merely the collapse of an old religion, but the birth of a new understanding of how a society might organize itself in the face of unprecedented challenges. The Birdman cult, with its emphasis on seasonal renewal and earned leadership, represented the Rapa Nui people's remarkable ability to adapt and transform even in their darkest hour. And so the island entered a new chapter of its long story, one where the ancient stone guardians lay sleeping in the grass, while new spiritual powers took flight on the ocean breeze. The Moai had not been forgotten, but their time of active guardianship had passed. In their place, the Birdman cult offered a different kind of protection, one that looked not to the past but to the future, not to the permanence of stone but to the promise of renewal that came with each new season. In this peaceful twilight of remembrance, we can honor both the fallen giants and the soaring spirits that succeeded them, understanding that each represented the best hopes and deepest wisdom of a people who never stopped believing in the possibility of transformation, even when their world seemed to be far. As we continue our gentle journey through the twilight of Rapa Nui history, we come upon one of the most profound and mysterious chapters in the island's story. The wind carries with it a different quality now, heavy with the weight of change and transformation. For we have reached the time when the mighty Moai, those eternal guardians who had watched over the island for centuries, began to fall. Picture the island as it was in the late 1700s, when the first light of dawn would reveal a landscape forever altered. Where once proud rows of Moai had stood sentinel along the coastline, their faces turned inward to protect their people. Now, many lay fallen, their massive forms stretched across the earth like sleeping giants. The sight would have been both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring, for even in their fallen state, these monuments retained their power to move the human spirit. The shift away from the Moai cult and the toppling of the giant statues occurred toward the end of the 18th century, marking the end of an era that had defined the island's identity for nearly a millennium. But this was not a sudden catastrophe that struck in a single night. Rather, it was a gradual process, as complex and nuanced as the society that created these monuments in the first place. The reasons for the Moai's fall were as varied as the statues themselves. Some statues may have simply fallen from neglect, others were knocked over in earthquakes, and some were intentionally toppled during fighting between competing family groups. The most common theory is that the statues were overthrown in tribal warfare to humiliate the enemy, with most statues falling forward with their faces to the earth. As the island's resources dwindled and the competition between clans intensified, the very symbols that had once united the people in common purpose became targets in their growing conflicts. Imagine the profound psychological impact of watching these ancestral guardians being deliberately toppled. For the Rapa Nui people, this was not merely the destruction of stone monuments, but the shattering of the spiritual foundations upon which their entire world had been built. The toppling of the Moai represented more than physical destruction. By then, the cult had lost most of its political and religious credibility, even though the Rapa Nui continued worshipping their ancestors. The old ways of organizing society, of determining leadership, of connecting with the divine, were being called into question. The Moai, once symbols of unified spiritual power, had become associated with the old rivalries and competitions that had brought the island to the brink of ecological and social collapse. But human societies, like the ocean itself, are never truly still. Even as the old beliefs crumbled, new ones began to emerge from the ruins. At some point in history, the cult of deified ancestors, represented by the Moai statues, was abandoned, due to a loss of prestige of the old political and religious order. In its place, something entirely different began to take shape. After the decline of Moai culture on Easter Island, a new cult emerged that revolved around fertility and the worship of migratory seabirds. This was the birth of the Tangata Manu, or Birdman cult, a religious transformation that would fundamentally alter the spiritual landscape of Rapa Nui. This unique religion emerged on Rapa Nui in about the 1600s and lasted into the 1800s. The Birdman cult represented a radical departure from the ancestor worship that had dominated the island for centuries. Where the Moai had been static, eternal guardians carved from volcanic stone, the new faith looked to the sky and the sea, to the seasonal migrations of the sooty tern and the promise of renewal that came with each spring. As the Moai had represented the idea of ancestor worship, the new Birdman cult was represented by the Tangatu Mana Birdman, a human body with the head of a bird. This transformation reflected a society in crisis, seeking new ways to organize itself and find meaning in an increasingly challenging world. The Birdman cult was not simply a replacement religion, but a complete reimagining of how power should be distributed and how the divine should be accessed. Instead of hereditary chiefs drawing their authority from ancient lineages, the new system created a competition where leadership could be earned through courage, skill, and spiritual favor. The center of this new faith was the ceremonial village of Orongo, perched on the rim of the Rano Cow crater. From this dramatic vantage point, participants could look out over the vast Pacific to the rocky islets of Motu Nui, Motu Iti, and Motu Cow, where the sooty terns came to nest each spring. It was here that the island's most daring young men would gather to compete for the honor of becoming the Tangata Manu, the Birdman, for the coming year. The competition itself was a testament to the Rapa Nui people's enduring connection to the sea and their extraordinary courage. Warriors would climb down the treacherous cliffs of Orongo, swim through shark-infested waters to the offshore islets, and search for the first sooty tern egg of the season. The man who successfully returned with an unbroken egg would become the Birdman, gaining not just personal honor, but also political power for his sponsor, chief. This new religious system brought with it a different kind of social organization. The cult of the Birdman reflected a very visible expression of political competition and cooperation at the island-wide level, representing a shift from the clan-based rivalries that had characterized the Moai period to a more integrated form of leadership that transcended traditional kinship groups. The transition was not without its symbolic power, as the great stone faces of the Moai lay silent in the grass. New images began to appear across the island's landscape. Petroglyphs of the Birdman, with his distinctive combination of human body and bird head, were carved into the volcanic rock at Orongo and other sacred sites. These images, etched into the living rock, represented a new understanding of the relationship between the human and divine realms. The Birdman himself lived a life of sacred isolation during his year of power. He would be expected to engage in no activity other than eating and sleeping during this time. This was not the active leadership of the old chiefs, but rather a form of spiritual guardianship where the Birdman served as a living connection between the earthly and divine realms. As we rest in the gentle embrace of this evening's story, we can almost feel the profound transformation that swept across the island during these tumultuous times. The fallen Moai, their faces pressed against the earth they had once protected, bore silent witness to the end of one era and the beginning of another. The wind that had once carried the sounds of stone chisels and work songs now brought the cries of seabirds and the prayers of a people learning to find hope in the sky rather than in the stone. This was not merely the collapse of an old religion, but the birth of a new understanding of how a society might organize itself in the face of unprecedented challenges. The Birdman cult, with its emphasis on seasonal renewal and earned leadership, represented the Rapa Nui people's remarkable ability to adapt and transform even in their darkest hour. And so the island entered a new chapter of its long story, one where the ancient stone guardians lay sleeping in the grass while new spiritual powers took flight on the ocean breeze. The Moai had not been forgotten, but their time of active guardianship had passed. In their place, the Birdman cult offered a different kind of protection, one that looked not to the past but to the future, not to the permanence of stone but to the promise of renewal that came with each new season. In this peaceful twilight of remembrance, we can honor both the fallen giants and the soaring spirits that succeeded them, understanding that each represented the best hopes and deepest wisdom of a people who never stopped believing in the possibility of transformation, even when their world seemed to be far.
The soft Pacific breeze carries us now into the 19th century, where our story takes on the weight of shadow and sorrow. Yet even in these darker chapters, we find threads of hope, moments of quiet strength that remind us of the enduring spirit that dwells within the human heart. Picture, if you will, the Moai standing as they always have, their ancient faces turned toward the inland villages, their silent vigil continuing through seasons of joy and seasons of grief alike. The stone guardians had witnessed many changes across the centuries, but nothing quite like what was to come in these troubled decades. The year 1862 arrived like any other on this remote island in the vast Pacific. The sun rose over the eastern cliffs, painting the grasslands in familiar golden hues. Children played among the scattered stones of ancient ceremonial platforms, their laughter mixing with the eternal song of the wind. Elders shared stories, in the shade of the few remaining trees, their voices carrying the wisdom of generations. But on a December morning that began like so many others, ships appeared on the horizon. Not the occasional European vessel that had visited in decades past, but multiple ships, their dark silhouettes cutting through the morning mist with purpose that felt different, urgent, and deeply troubling. These were not explorers or traders. These vessels came from Peru, their holds prepared not for goods or supplies, but for human cargo. The men aboard had traveled thousands of miles with a single, terrible goal in mind. The attack, when it came, shattered the morning calm like stone. Breaking stone, raiders swept across the beaches and into the villages with swift, practiced efficiency. Families were torn apart in moments that felt both eternal and impossibly brief. Parents reached for children. Elders called out in voices that carried across. The grasslands and the very air seemed to hold its breath in horror. Between 1,500 and 2,000 people, nearly half the island's population, were taken that day. Among them were many of the knowledge keepers, the storytellers who held in their memories the ancient songs, the genealogies that stretched back through countless generations, the sacred rituals that connected the living to their ancestors. Imagine the scene as these ships disappeared beyond the horizon, taking with them not just beloved family members, but entire libraries of oral tradition, generations of accumulated wisdom, irreplaceable connections to the island's deepest past. The silence that followed was unlike any the island had ever known. Those taken found themselves bound for the Guano Islands off the coast of Peru, where they were forced into brutal labor in the bird waste mines. The work was backbreaking, the conditions harsh beyond imagining. Diseases swept through the worker camps like wildfire through dry grass. Dysentery, tuberculosis, and other illnesses claimed life after life. Of the nearly 2,000 taken, fewer than 100 survived, long enough to see efforts made for their return. And of those survivors, only 15 would ever see their homeland again. They brought with them not celebration, but new sorrows, smallpox and other diseases that spread through the remaining population, like shadows lengthening at dusk. The island, that had once supported several thousand people, now found itself home to fewer than 600 souls. Ancient bloodlines that had endured for generations were severed. Traditional roles and responsibilities fell vacant with no one left to fill them. The complex social structure that had maintained order and meaning for centuries began to crumble, like cliffs worn away by relentless waves. Yet in this darkest hour, something remarkable persisted. The human spirit, like the hardy grasses that continued to grow between the fallen Moai, found ways to endure. Survivors banded together, sharing what little they had, caring for orphaned children, tending the sick with remedies passed down through generations. The remaining elders worked desperately to preserve what knowledge they could, gathering the scattered fragments of songs and stories, teaching young voices to carry forward what remained of their ancestral wisdom. They knew that with each passing day, irreplaceable pieces of their heritage disappeared like morning mist. But they persevered in their sacred duty as keepers of memory. In the villages, smaller now, but still alive with human warmth, people found new ways to create meaning from the remnants of their shattered world. They adapted ceremonies, simplified rituals, and created new traditions that honored both their losses and their determination to continue. The Moai, those eternal watchers, stood witness to it all. Some had toppled during the earlier conflicts, lying on their sides like sleeping giants. But others remained upright, their carved features catching the light of sunrise and sunset as they always had. Their presence a reminder that some things endure even when so much else is lost. As the century wore on, other challenges emerged. Chilean authorities arrived to assert control over the island, bringing new rules, new languages, new ways of organizing daily life. Traditional lands were restricted, ancient practices discouraged or forbidden, and the people found themselves strangers in their own homeland. Children grew up learning Spanish alongside their native tongue, attending schools where they were, taught foreign histories, while their own family stories were dismissed as primitive myths. The cultural erosion continued, grain by grain, like sand blown away by the persistent wind. Yet still, in quiet moments between the official pronouncements and formal ceremonies, the old ways persisted. Grandmothers hummed ancient lullabies as they rocked their grandchildren to sleep. Fishermen still whispered traditional blessings to the ocean before launching their boats. Young people meeting in secret still shared the stories their elders had managed to preserve. The island itself seemed to mourn during these decades. The grasslands, once carefully managed by a much larger population, grew wild and unkempt. Ancient terraces built for cultivation crumbled without maintenance. The careful balance between human needs and natural resources that had sustained the island for so many centuries was broken, leaving both people and land diminished. But even in diminishment, there was still beauty. Sunsets still painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Ocean waves still carved intricate patterns in the black volcanic sand. Seabirds still wheeled overhead in graceful spirals, their cries mixing with the eternal whisper of wind through grass. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, signs of recovery began to appear. Survivors learned to navigate their changed circumstances. Families reformed around new configurations of kinship. Children born into this transformed world learned to find joy in simpler pleasures, to create hope from smaller possibilities. The population slowly began to grow again, though it would be generations before the island would support more than a few hundred residents. Each new birth was celebrated, not just as the arrival of a new soul, but as a victory over the forces that had tried to erase the Rapa Nui people entirely. As the 19th century drew to a close, the island settled into a new rhythm, quieter and more subdued than before, but unmistakably alive. The few hundred remaining inhabitants had learned to live with loss, to find meaning in survival itself, to cherish connections that remained while honoring the memory of all that had been taken away. The Moai continued their vigil through it all, their stone faces weathering the decades with patient endurance. They had witnessed the height of their Creator's civilization, its conflicts and transformations, its near destruction and its stubborn persistence. They would witness whatever came next with the same timeless composure. In the soft light of evening. As trade winds carried the scent of ocean across the grasslands, the island settled into the kind of peace that comes after great storms. It was not the peace of forgetting, but the deeper peace of survival. of having endured the unendurable, and finding oneself still breathing, still hoping, still human. The children of this diminished but determined community would grow up with a different relationship to their heritage than their ancestors had known. They would be bridges between worlds, carrying forward what they could while adapting to realities their great-grandparents could never have imagined. And as night fell over this most remote of inhabited places, the stars emerged in their ancient patterns, the same constellations that had guided the first Polynesian voyagers to these shores more than 1,000 years before. The cosmic order remained unchanged, offering its eternal promise that even in the deepest darkness, dawn would come again. The Moai stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky, their vigil continuing as it had for centuries, as it would for centuries to come. In their steadfast presence, the island found its anchor, its connection to a past that could never be entirely erased, no matter how much had been lost along the way. This was the century of shadows, but shadows exist only where light has touched. And somewhere in the gentle breathing of sleeping children, in the whispered prayers of their grandparents, in the eternal conversation between wind and stone, that light continued to shine, patient and inextinguishable, waiting for its time to grow.
As we move gently forward through time, leaving behind the shadows of the 19th century, we find ourselves in an age of gradual awakening. The 20th century arrives on Easter Island like the first light of dawn after the longest night, bringing with it new possibilities, new voices, and most importantly, a renewed recognition of what this remote place truly represents to the world. The Moai, those patient sentinels carved from volcanic stone, continue their eternal watch. But now, as decades pass, something remarkable begins to happen. The outside world, which had for so long seen this island as little more than a curiosity or a source of labor, begins to understand that these silent guardians hold secrets far more precious than anyone had imagined. Picture the scene as the first archaeologists arrive, their eyes wide with wonder as they walk among the scattered statues. Some Moai stand proudly upright, their backs turned to the sea, faces gazing inland toward the villages where their creators once lived. Others lie on their sides, partially buried by centuries of soil and grass, like sleeping giants waiting patiently to tell their stories. These early researchers bring with them tools and techniques unknown to previous visitors. They measure and photograph, they carefully excavate and document, but most importantly, they listen. They seek out the few remaining elders who still carry fragments of the old knowledge, the stories passed down through generations that survived even the darkest times. One by one, pieces of the puzzle begin to emerge from the mists of time. The statues, it becomes clear, were not randomly placed across the landscape. Each one was positioned with careful intention, part of a vast ceremonial complex that once united the entire island in shared purpose and meaning. The quarry at Raraku reveals its secrets gradually, like a flower opening to the morning sun. Here, nearly 400 Moai remain, some completed and ready for transport, others still attached to the bedrock from which they were carved. The site becomes a window into the ancient world, showing us the Moai not as isolated monuments, but as part of a living, breathing culture. As excavations continue, a beautiful truth emerges. Many of the Moai that appear to be just heads poking above the ground are actually complete figures, their bodies buried beneath centuries of accumulated soil. When carefully unearthed, these statues reveal intricate carvings, symbols etched into the stone that speak of beliefs and traditions that stretch back into the mists of prehistory. The 20th century brings not just archaeologists, but also a new generation of Rapa Nui people who begin to reclaim their heritage with quiet determination. Children and grandchildren of the survivors start to piece together the fragments of their ancestral culture, learning traditional songs from elderly relatives, practicing ancient crafts that had nearly disappeared. Young people begin to take pride in their unique identity, no longer seeing their heritage as something to be hidden or forgotten, but as a treasure to be celebrated and preserved. They learn to carve wood in the traditional manner to create the intricate designs that once adorned ceremonial objects. They practice traditional dances, their movements telling stories that words alone cannot capture. The island itself seems to respond to this cultural renaissance. Archaeological discoveries multiply as more sites are carefully excavated and studied. Ancient petroglyphs emerge from beneath layers of vegetation, their symbols offering tantalizing glimpses into the minds and beliefs of the statue builders. At Orongo, the ceremonial village perched on the rim of the Rano Cow crater. Here, young men once competed in a dangerous ritual, swimming to offshore islets to collect the first egg of the sooty tern, their success determining leadership for the coming year. These discoveries help paint a fuller picture of a culture that was far more complex and sophisticated than anyone had previously understood. The Rapa Nui people were not primitive statue builders, but sophisticated navigators, skilled artists. 1,000 years. As the decades pass, the world begins to take notice. Easter Island becomes not just a destination for adventurous travelers, but a symbol of human creativity and resilience. The Moai appear on book covers and documentaries, their enigmatic faces becoming icons recognized around the globe. But perhaps more importantly, they become teachers. Standing in their presence, visitors from every corner of the world find themselves confronting profound questions about legacy, about what we leave behind for future generations, about the relationship between human ambition and environmental stewardship. The statues speak without words of a people who poured their hearts and souls into creating something eternal. Each Moai represents countless hours of skilled labor, generations of accumulated knowledge, and an unshakable belief that some things are worth preserving forever. Ancient guardians. There is something about their presence that transcends language and culture, something that speaks directly to the deepest parts of the human spirit. Perhaps it is their sheer persistence, the way they have endured through centuries of change and challenge. The faces themselves seem to embody a kind of timeless wisdom, carved with just enough detail to suggest humanity while remaining beautifully abstract. They invite contemplation rather than demanding answers. Each face is unique, yet all share a common expression of calm dignity, as if they have seen all that the world can offer and found peace with both its beauty and its sorrow. As tourism gradually develops, the island faces new challenges. How to balance the need for economic development with the preservation of irreplaceable cultural treasures. How to share this heritage with the world while protecting it from the wear and tear of too many eager feet and hands. The Rapa Nui people themselves become the guardians of this balance, working with researchers and conservationists to ensure that their ancestors' legacy is preserved for future generations. They serve as guides, sharing their knowledge with visitors, helping others understand that the Moai are not just stone sculptures, but embodiments of living culture. In the soft evening light, as the sun sets behind the quarry at Rano, the Moai seem to come alive with subtle shadows and highlights over a bustling, thriving community. The wind whispers through the grass around their bases, and in that whisper, some visitors swear they can hear echoes of ancient voices, works. The sound is neither sad nor joyful, but something deeper, the voice of time itself, speaking of continuity and change, of loss and rediscovery. Life of the island, watching over the small community of descendants who call this place home. They observe the arrival and departure of visitors from around the world, each person carrying away their own interpretation of what these silent guardians represent. Children play in their shadows, just as children did 1,000 years ago. Elders sit quietly in their presence, finding in their steadfast endurance a source of comfort and strength. Artists and writers find inspiration in their mysterious expressions, creating new works that carry the spirit of the Moai to places far beyond this remote Pacific island. The statues have become bridges between past and present, between the local and the universal, between the seen and the unseen. They remind us that human creativity can transcend the limitations of time and circumstance, that the impulse to create something beautiful and meaningful is one of our most precious gifts. As night falls and the stars emerge in the vast Pacific sky, the Moai settle into their eternal contemplation. The same constellations that guided their creators across the ocean centuries ago wheel overhead. In their presence, the modern world seems to slow down, to find a rhythm more in tune with the natural cycles of earth and sea and sky. The urgent demands of contemporary life fade into background whispers, replaced by something more fundamental, the simple recognition of our connection to those who came before us and those who will come after. The legacy of the Moai is not just carved in stone, but written in the hearts of all who encounter them. They speak of human ambition and creativity, of the drive to create something that will outlast our brief time on Earth. They remind us that we are all part of a larger story, one that began long before we arrived and will continue long after we are gone. The Moai whisper, with the wind of continuity and connection, of the eternal human desire to leave something beautiful behind, something that speaks across the centuries of who we were and what we valued most deeply. And as the Pacific night deepens around this most remote of inhabited places, the statues continue their patient watch, guardians not just of one island's history, but of the enduring human. And so, dear traveler, our long journey through time comes to its peaceful end, as all journeys must. We have walked together across centuries, witnessed the rise and transformation of a remarkable civilization, and stood in the presence of those eternal stone guardians who have watched over this remote island for so many generations. As we prepare to take our leave of this sacred place, let us pause for a moment in the gathering twilight. The sun is setting now over the Pacific, painting the western sky in soft shades of amber and rose. The light falls gently across the grasslands, touching each blade with golden fire, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the ancient ceremonial platforms. The Moai stand, as they always have, their carved features catching the last rays of daylight. Some face inland toward the villages, their backs turned to the endless ocean. Others lie on their sides, partially buried by time and earth, like sleeping giants lost in dreams that span the centuries. Each one unique, each one carrying within its stone heart the hopes and beliefs of the people who shaped it with such loving care. Listen now to the sound of the evening wind as it moves through the grass around their bases. It carries with it the whispers of 1,000 years, the accumulated memories of all who have called this place home. In that gentle susurrus, you might hear the echo of ancient chants, the laughter of children playing in the shadows of the statues, the quiet conversations of elders sharing wisdom beneath the vast Pacific sky. The air itself seems to hold the essence of all the stories we have shared together. The arrival of the first Polynesian voyagers, their great canoes riding the swells toward an unknown shore. The gradual development of a unique culture shaped by isolation and the constant presence of the sea. The centuries of statue carving, each moai a testament to human creativity and spiritual devotion. We have witnessed the conflicts that arose as resources grew scarce, the painful decisions made by people trying to balance tradition with survival. We have walked through the darkest chapters, when disease and exploitation nearly extinguished the light of Rapa Nui culture entirely. And we have celebrated the gradual renaissance, the patient work of preservation and rediscovery that continues. To this day, through it all, the moai have remained steadfast and serene, watching over the island and its people with expressions that speak of deep understanding and infinite patience. They have seen empires rise and fall, languages change, traditions evolve and transform, yet they endure, carved from the island's own volcanic stone, as permanent as anything human hands can create. What is it about these silent figures that moves us so deeply? Perhaps it is their very silence, the way they invite us to fill the quiet spaces with our own thoughts and dreams. Or perhaps it is their permanence, their reminder that some things can outlast the brief span of any individual life, connecting us to both past and future in an unbroken chain of human experience. As you rest here in the peaceful twilight of this remote island, let your mind drift like the evening breeze across the grasslands. Feel the presence of all those who have stood in this place before you, all who have looked upon these faces and wondered at their meaning. You are part of that long line of observers now, another link in the chain that stretches back to the statue builders themselves. The stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same constellations that guided ancient navigators across thousands of miles of open ocean. The Southern Cross hangs like a jeweled pendant against the velvet darkness, while the Milky Way spreads its ghostly light from horizon to horizon. Under this cosmic canopy, the concerns and anxieties of the modern world seem very far away indeed. Let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of the waves that eternally caress the island's shores. Feel the solid earth beneath you, the same volcanic stone from which the moai were carved. You are connected to this place now, part of its story, a witness to its enduring mystery and beauty. In the growing darkness, the statues seem to merge with the landscape itself, becoming part of the natural world from which they emerged. Yet their presence remains unmistakable, a gentle reminder of the human capacity to create meaning from stone, to leave messages for future generations written in the most durable medium available. What message do they carry for you? These silent guardians. What wisdom do you find in their patient faces, their unwavering gaze? Perhaps it is the simple reminder that we are all temporary visitors in this world, but the love and creativity we pour into our work can outlast our mortal forms. Perhaps it is the recognition that true monumentality comes not from size or grandeur, but from the depth of feeling that inspires creation. Or perhaps their message is even simpler, that in a world of constant change and uncertainty, there is comfort to be found in endurance, in the knowledge that some things remain constant across the centuries, the human need for meaning, for connection, for leaving something beautiful behind, the universal desire to be remembered, to matter, to add something of value to the great ongoing story of our species as the night deepens around you. Let these thoughts settle into your consciousness like sediment falling through still water. Feel the profound peace that comes from being in the presence of something truly ancient and enduring. Let the weight of all those centuries wash over you like a gentle tide, carrying away the immediate concerns of your daily life and replacing them with a deeper sense of perspective and calm. The wind continues its eternal conversation with the grass, a sound that has remained unchanged for millennia. In its soft whisper, you can hear the voice of time itself, speaking of patience and persistence, of the slow but inexorable processes that shape both stone and spirit. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift deeper into this timeless place. Feel yourself becoming part of the island's ancient rhythm, your heartbeat synchronizing with the pulse of the earth itself. You are safe here in this sacred space, protected by guardians who have watched over countless dreamers before you. Let your thoughts grow as soft and formless as the mist that sometimes rises from the crater lakes at dawn. Feel yourself sinking deeper into the peaceful embrace of this most remote of all inhabited places, where the urgent demands of the modern world cannot reach, where time moves at the pace of growing grass and weathering stone. The Moai continue their vigil as you rest, their presence a gentle benediction on your dreams. They have watched over so many sleepers across the centuries, offering their silent protection to all who seek refuge in this place of profound peace. Tonight, they watch over you as well, guardians not just of the island's heritage, but of your own journey toward rest and renewal. In your dreams, you might find yourself walking among them in the golden light of morning, seeing them as they once were when the island thrived with the voices of their creators. You might hear the songs they sang as they worked, the ceremonies they conducted in honor of their ancestors, the stories they told beneath the Southern Cross. Or perhaps your dreams will carry you even further back, to the moment when the first voyagers caught sight of this island rising from the endless blue of the Pacific. Feel their excitement and relief after so many days at sea, their wonder at finding this perfect refuge in the vast emptiness of the ocean. Whatever visions come to you in the hours ahead, know that they are blessed by this sacred place, enriched by your connection to all the dreamers who have rested here before you. The island holds your dreams as gently as it holds the memories of its past, weaving them into the great tapestry of human experience that continues to unfold beneath the patient gaze of the Moai. Sleep now, peaceful traveler, knowing that you Carry with you always the quiet wisdom of this remarkable place. Let the silence of Easter Island become the silence of your own deepest rest. Let the endurance of the stone guardians become the foundation of your own inner strength. The Pacific stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, marking the passage of hours and seasons with celestial precision. The waves continue their gentle conversation with the shore, a lullaby that has soothed countless generations to sleep. And the Moai stand there, vigil through the night, watching over the island and all who find peace within its embrace. Rest well, knowing that when you wake, the world will still be here, still turning on its axis, still offering its countless opportunities for wonder and discovery. But for now, in this moment, there is only peace, only the gentle embrace of ancient stone and eternal sky, only the profound quiet of a place where time itself seems to pause in reverence for the enduring power of human dreams. The story of Easter Island continues, as all true stories do, in the hearts and minds of those who carry its memory forward. Tonight, you become part of that story. Another thread in the tapestry that connects past to future, dreamer to dreamer, across the vast expanse of time and space. Sleep well, gentle traveler. The Moai